Hi guys, it's John here, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by somebody I've been interested in for over a decade, artist Adam Dant. And some of you might not be familiar with him, although he's been featured in major international publications and media, including the financial press. He's born in Cambridge, not Oxford, Cambridge, and studied fine art printmaking in his early career at many leading institutions. He's been recipient of a number of awards, and in 2015, he was actually nominated or appointed as the official artist to the UK's general election. From his studio in London, he's really gained worldwide renown for what I would consider to be epic and extremely narrative ink drawings that are what some have called mockuments, and detail the myths and the status of high finance, politics, and society at large. Adam is somebody whose work is internationally exhibited. It's in the Tate in Britain, it's also in the MOMA in New York, and a number of leading galleries, including those at UBS and Pictet, include his work, as well as other public and private galleries. You're probably asking yourself, what does this have to do with fintech? And what I thought this would be a great way to do is step outside of our traditional deal making and the bubble that we exist in, and have a bit of fun and put some questions into context about how we all work together and interact in these unprecedented times, especially. Stick with us to the end, because Adam's dealer Tag Fine Arts has given us a discount, and I'll be mentioning the code for that, so you can get your hands on some of his art, which is actually in print form rather attainable for many people. So without further ado, I'm going to zip it and welcome Adam Dant.
Hello, John. Thank you for inviting me. I wondered who you were talking about there for a minute. I didn't realize I'd done so much.
Well, yeah, modest man and typical British fashion, and it's a pleasure to have you, Adam, and also great to see the charming study behind you. I hope we could get started by maybe you doing a bit of a better job to explain who you are in your professional career, and maybe get us started to tell us a bit about who you are personally and where you've come from.
Certainly. Well, I was, as you said, I was born in Cambridge, so I grew up amongst the dreaming spires. And I think, like most artists, you're often asked, what drew you to this as a profession, as a vocation. In my case, I don't think I would have become an artist were it not for Cambridge. I remember when I was a child being dumped at the Fitzwilliam Museum by my mother while she went off to do the shopping, and so from a very early age, I was alone with all of these artifacts, and they kind of seeped into me. Lots of artists say they can't imagine working in any other field, and I think there is an element to that in terms of what I do. There's a compulsion to what I do, but at the same time, I wanted to make things that I wanted to see myself. To make that make sense, I wanted to, the kind of art I wanted to create was the kind of stuff that myself I would find engaging when I was looking around the Fitzwilliam collection, if that makes sense. And specifically, I was drawn to narrative art where there was a story, and art which took you on a journey into the past, or into some kind of constructed realm that that taught you or instructed you, or gave you some kind of didactic experience of the times in which you lived, and the continuity of themes. So I'm getting a bit specific here, but practically what I do kind of falls between a kind of a graphic art, and when you mention the word mockuments, there's an element of what I do being decentered. Maybe I come up with fake organizations that purport to be in the real world but aren't. Like, for example, recently I'm working on resetting the journeys of the Argonauts and Ulysses into my own surroundings through a kind of touristic organization. And in the past, I've set up faux universities. For example, when I lived in Paris, I set up a university to introduce 1,000 new words to the French language, called the Academy for the Improvement of the French Language. And I think when I first came to London and didn't have a studio, didn't have much money, I thought, how am I going to introduce my work to the public without a studio, a gallery, whatnot? So I started a daily newspaper called Donald Parsnip's Daily Journal, my studio was where I was living was just on the edge of the City of London. So I became very interested with the birth of the City of London, the birth of trade, of the insurance houses, and specifically how the coffee houses as social centres and places where ideas would ferment. The status of the coffee houses, particularly in terms of dissemination of information. I took the form of these early 18th century newspapers and applied it to my own practice as an artist in creating this kind of 8-page daily journal. So as an artist, I wake up in the morning at about 7 o'clock. I had a job in an old master picture gallery in the West End, Agnew's on Old Bond Street. I'd produce my newspaper in the available time I had in the morning, photocopy it 100 times at Frank's photocopy shop, Bethnal Green, fold it up, put all the copies in my pocket and hand it to passers-by on my way from where I lived in East London to where I worked in West London, which took me through the financial centre, City of London, and through Smithfield, through the legal heart of London in Lincoln's Inn, and then through the Covent Garden to Mayfair, handing this newspaper out and telling people, "This, I'm an artist. This is a work of art in the form of a newspaper." So I did this for 5 years, and through that, I gained a kind of foothold in the art world, I suppose, as a pamphleteer.
Fascinating background, and you've told us a little bit about how you found your niche there, Adam. Can you talk a little bit about some of your more well-known work, or some of the things that you've done in, say, the last decade that we can speak to?
I suppose I could start with one of the most recent exhibitions I had. Well, I haven't been able to have an exhibition like most artists since March last year. But prior to that, I had an exhibition about the world of the super rich, of the kind of the beau monde. It was called the Gilded Desert, the exhibition, and it showed various places where you might encounter the one percenters, places such as Saint-Tropez, St. Moritz, Annabelle's Club in Mayfair. I think there was one depiction of Mustique, the island of Mustique, where Princess Margaret used to hang out. And the show was titled The Gilded Desert, after a quote from May Morris, William Morris's jeweller daughter, who, returning to Chelsea after it had become gentrified this would be back in the 1930s, 40s, she referred to it as a gilded desert where wealth was abundant, everything you wanted was available, but at the same time it was kind of lacking in something. And being from her socialist familial background, obviously referred to the edification of culture and the visual arts. So through this series of 8 drawings, they're all kind of teeming with detail, and through this detail, the viewer is kind of exposed to a narrative that describes the lives of these one percenters in these places. But at the same time, I've introduced elements from history or from mythology or from works of fiction into the landscape. So, for example, when we see Princess Margaret's former home, Les Joliot, in Mustique, the Oliver Messel building has been transformed into the court of another sister of royalty, being Mary Tudor, who's arriving in a kind of Tudor armada onto the beaches of Mustique and retaking over this place. There's all sorts of Elizabethan dancing going on, and the current royal household are being routed. Also in the series, the drawing of Saint-Tropez shows the harbour, but rather than the entertainments proffered by the bars and discotheques of Saint-Tropez, the town has been taken over by art galleries, not just contemporary art galleries, but the picture describes the history of connoisseurship and kind of elevating the mind through the visual arts and the collectability of this stuff. So it shows my former employer Agnew's on the beach, and the harbour has been turned into like a high-end Maastricht type art fair. As we all know, the art fairs follow the money, so why not have an art fair? Well, this is literally in the harbour, so all the stalls are floating within the harbour of Saint-Tropez.
I have to say, there's a real sense of humor to your work, Adam, which I love. And you've talked a little bit about how that came together, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about the tradition in a second. But before we dive into that, I wanted to spend a minute and get into more of the detail of really your process. You talked a bit about how you got to how you're making these drawings, but can you tell us a little bit more about, for example, your sketching, your studio, and how you work with the art world?
Sure. I suppose, yes, behind each of these drawings, because they're so dense, is a lot of preparation, a lot of research. And when, as often people do ask of artists, the perennial question, my God, how long did this take you to do? I mean, there's a lot of detail in the work. I mean, quite often 50% of the work is the research, or just hanging around with a sketchbook in Mayfair, observing what's going on. I'm a big proponent of drawing for everyone. I think it's not necessarily just a talent to reproduce what you see in front of you. It's a way of encountering the world, or filtering the visual world over a period of time, and drawing in information through the operation of drawing that you wouldn't otherwise think of in the same way were you just observing it, even over time. And so quite often when I look at my sketchbooks, because a sketch may have taken me 15 minutes, half an hour, I'm kind of back in that moment. And there's a lot of information that's not in the sketch, peripheral stuff, that suddenly comes back to mind. You know, especially humorous things that were going on, as you mentioned. So often, for example, when I've been doing a series of drawings of London squares, and round the borders of these London squares, you'll see the kind of individuals that you'll expect to encounter there. So the obvious thing to do is, when drawing a London square, is to go to the square. So, for example, I've just finished a drawing of Sloane Square, seen from the north, looking to the south. So I installed myself in Colbert, which is quite a nice cafe, often full of asset managers and chaps on their way to, the various hedge fund offices. They become part of the characters in the drawing I'm making. And I'll take all these sketches, and often I'll make a list, just a written list from all the sketches of stuff that I want to put into the drawing. I trained in perspectival systems of drawing. So when I start one of these London square drawings, I'll grid out a sheet of paper and loosely in pencil kind of map out some kind of perspectival grid, which is a bit like an armature onto which to hang this more arcane, humorous and whimsical visual information. And the good thing about the list is, when you're an artist in the studio, you're looking at your canvas, you keep stabbing at it and wondering, is this painting finished yet? With my work, when the list is all ticked off, then I know the work's finished. I think we have a picture here on the screen of my workspace. I'll tell you a bit about my studio, if you like.
That would be great.
I initially, I was in Rome. I had a Rome scholarship in printmaking. And when I came back to London, because I was keen on working in the field of print, particularly commercial print, I moved to this neighbourhood in East London called Shoreditch, and a street in particular called Redchurch Street, which was where all of the printers seemed to congregate. So on this one street, you could get lithography done, you could get plates made, you could have letterpress done, foil blocking, the whole kit and caboodle of printing was on my doorstep. Unfortunately, I lost this studio about 2 years ago. The area, the printers moved out, and the expensive hand moisturizer shops moved in. There's a Cicconi's on the street now. And, when I moved here 30 years ago, if someone had told me you'd be able to get a boiled lobster on Redchurch Street, I'd never have believed them. It was all kind of eels and greasy spoons. So my current studio, the picture which you just showed, is above a synagogue. It's Britain's third oldest synagogue, called Sandys Row. I because I've been in the area about 25, 30 years, I kind of know, I've got to know a lot of the locals, and realized this space was probably available. And after some letter writing, managed to rent this old caretaker's flat in was above the Sandys Row Synagogue. It's an amazing space to work in. It's up on the third floor, and it's right on the very edge of the City of London. So I think I'm in the borough of Tower Hamlets, the Spitalfields part of London, and over the road out of the window is the City of London, which provides me, as I've mentioned, with a lot of subject matter for my drawings. So in the studio, I've decorated it in the kind of 18th century English domestic interior fashion with these. When I was in Rome, I learned how to do all this kind of fresco work. So I've made it quite a comfortable space for myself in which to work, rather than the kind of paint-strewn garret which one might expect from a fine artist. It's a bit more sedate.
I know you also do some larger work. It didn't really quite reflect the back wall there, but sometimes you do the full wall as well, right?
Yes. I like the idea from being what could loosely be termed a graphic artist, of taking minimum means, i.e., in my case, a single bottle of ink, and these huge sheets of paper, trying to create something that might sustain the attention of the viewer for maybe as long as your average Hollywood blockbuster. It's quite disheartening when you're an artist to sit in the National Gallery and just observe how little time the average visitor gives to each painting. I think less than a couple of minutes. That's one of the reasons that the graphic arts or visual narrative appeal to me. The idea that you're communicating through another means other than language, through visual narrative, factual information, at the same time as provoking maybe a subjective emotional response, I suppose.
Really fascinating to hear you mention that. I wanted to talk later on about comedy a little bit and entrepreneurship, but I often see parallels between the creative arts and entrepreneurship. It's that fear of failure, the chance that nobody picks up on your idea, and I wondered if you have any thoughts on how you approach that subject. You mentioned a bit how that's why you gravitated towards graphic arts, but how do you as an artist approach that challenge over and over again?
Well, obviously, I've got to feed the dog, so some kind of reassurance in terms of a reasonably healthy bank balance is necessary. And but I think as an artist, the act of creating art, it draws you in, and suddenly you realise you've been in your studio and haven't seen anyone for like a month, making this stuff which you have no idea whether anyone will be interested in whatsoever. There's that aspect to being an artist, and that takes over. It's I suppose it's what's now commonly called the passion for the activity, but then you hear hairdressers saying that they have similar passion, that they're artists as well. My hairdresser is not an artist, by the way.
Nor is mine.
I think before, but at the same time, there are obviously practical considerations. I work quite often to commission, so people who've seen work that I've done come to the studio or contact me and ask if I might work on something specific. I've over the past 10 or 12 years found myself making a lot of maps, and I kind of fell in love with the cartographic form when I was in Rome. As a form, it just contains so much of what I'm interested in. It purports to be a representation of objective reality. It's a as a work of art, it's something that everyone can read because of the idea of the map being so common, and but at the same time, everyone reads it in a different fashion. We all use maps for different reasons, and there's also the visual language of the map can be extended to incorporate all manner of aesthetic concerns. So people have come to me. I recently last year made the map for London Art Week, which shows the neighbourhoods of St James and Mayfair, where most of the old master picture dealers are, and on top of that, it has has practical information about where the galleries are, but also a deeper history of St James told through various strange anecdotes. But for example, did anyone know that Albemarle Street is the first one-way street in London? There's a huge traffic jam arrived because of a Faraday lecture at the Royal Institution, and suddenly the police realised that maybe it wasn't practical having traffic going two ways up Albemarle Street. I'm digressing.
No, fascinating digression. I don't know if you've heard of Paula Scher. She's a famous graphic artist from New York, and she does some really fascinating art outside of her graphic design, which is all about maps and exactly that bending of perception and our view of reality that you talk about. So I think it's a strong lineage. Before I talk a little bit more about some of the ideas that are going on in your art, Adam, I wanted to ask, who exactly do you see as your audience? You mentioned a general public at points, and as well some commissions. How do you approach the topic of your audience?
Yeah, that's another perennial question. It's a cliche to say artists have to produce a work for themselves, but like all cliche, there's an element of the absolute about it. In terms of thinking about who I might perceive as my audience, when I was doing the daily newspaper, it was just whoever happened to be in my path as I was walking from East London to West London, and I just find that it's kind of amusing, and there's a literalist aspect to it. When you look at how the Arts Council England, when you're making a funding application, ask who we are seeking new audiences for art. I mean, they're out there standing on the street in your path. That was my attitude when I was producing this Donald Parsnips Daily Journal, and there's something of that to what I do now. To the extent that maybe it's a coincidence if the people who I'm representing in this work encounter it and recognize themselves.
Something else that I found interesting about your art, you've talked about it a couple of times, but I think it bears mentioning, is there's a lot of philosophy, mythology, and architecture in your art. Do you think that's something that's important? What are some of the major themes that you draw on? How did that become such a central thing for you?
Possibly living in Rome for a year made me aware of the impact of one's environment in terms of the history of the place it has on the individual citizen. To cite a particular map of mine, I made a map based on the graffiti I encountered in Rome, some of which I realized had been done the night before, but other examples appear to have been, it would go back decades, even centuries. And I like the idea that, through this graffiti, you could find a particular mode or to navigate one's way around the city that it had an immediate connection to not an official history, but a much more slippery history of a place. So quite often when I'm drawing certain places, architectural spaces, public spaces, famous interiors, I'll bring a kind of literalist view of history to bear on those spaces. I made a drawing of the Royal Exchange at the heart of the City of London as the labyrinth with the Minotaur in the center of it. There's a kind of literalist aspect to the city being like a labyrinth, but at the same time, there's a kind of rather cliched metaphor going on at the same time, whereby maybe the chaps who work in the city of London see themselves as kind of latter-day Theseuses, or even Alexanders.
Yeah, I was going to say there seems to be a clear link between graphic design and also the symbology of architecture and mythology and the storytelling involved, which I think you do an excellent job of drawing on. It picks up on a theme that's a little bit more related to what we do at FinTech Plus, which is money, which has all sorts of symbology and even art in and of itself. I wanted to pick up on two themes or general themes of artists who've approached the topic of money, let's say, or done things that are a bit similar, and first contrast a bit of a group that's a little bit different. I think Andy Warhol comes to mind a lot when we talk about being the highest form of art. But there's also been other famous contemporary artists like Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons, who've really picked up on what to me seems similar to your graphic design roots in mass-produced, themes of value and meaning and topics like that. But you fit much more into a category of, I would say, the satire artist, folks like Hogarth and Gillray. How do you see those two worlds and overall the broader theme of meaning and finance and topics like that?
I would say that my practice as an artist is very distinct from what Andy Warhol was doing or what Jeff Koons does now. There are probably two reasons why you'd want to produce a lot of something. One is because you can make more money because you can sell more of it. But then I think in my case, being more rooted in the tradition of the popular print, it's producing more of something so that more people can see it. That's why I go back to what I said about modest means. I occasionally use gold leaf, but nowhere near the extent that Mr. Koons and Mr. Hirst do. There was a tradition in London, going back to the pamphleteering tradition, where people would want to have some kind of keepsake of events, for example, like the Frost Fairs or a political event, and would be able to buy what is loosely termed a popular print from print vendors in the street, who would just churn out as many of these things as there were an audience for them. You could buy a plain print, which is just a black and white print, for a certain amount of money. If you wanted to spend more, you'd buy a coloured print. They'd have probably teams of children colouring them in. But I like the fact that what I'm doing in terms of printmaking now goes back to that tradition, rather than going back to the tradition of Lucas Cranach, the artist, had a workshop as busy as Jeff Koons' workshop. I suppose to sum up, it's what I'm producing is less of a commodity and more of I don't want to say ephemera, because they are collectible works of art, but maybe the information or the message or the what's contained in the work, what someone gets from it, is as important as its presence as physically manifest, if that makes sense.
It does, and it also raises a lot of questions, which is, I guess, what most great art does. So coming back to where we started, I mentioned that I came across your work about 10 years ago, which was during the times of the last big financial crisis, which is something we all remember like it was yesterday. I think it's safe to say that we're in the middle of perhaps an even bigger period of change right now that goes beyond just a financial catastrophe, but something involving all sorts of different elements of society. I was curious on that point to ask, what are you working on these days, and where do you see your work taking its direction in the future?
I think it might sound a bit selfish, but I've heard a lot of artists saying that the lockdown has been the most enjoyable and most productive period they have experienced for a long time. And looking at what fellow artists were producing or had produced when we were unlocked in the late spring, I suddenly realized, wow, this is great work people are doing. It's it's possibly due to like an enforced inward lookingness. I don't know whether there might be a parallel in the world of the corporate world, or in the world of the asset manager, or in the world of fintech. I don't know how much of a emotional, soul-searching, self-aware field it is. I think in both fields there are pragmatic, practical concerns.
Fair question. I think we're all doing this.
Yeah, but so both worlds are reacting to things that are greater than themselves. Obviously, there are positive things about looking inward intently, and negative things. In terms of results, quite often a work of visual art, it might be several years before it's appreciated as something that's pertinent or powerful. Maybe the same applies to your world, where obviously in terms of global financial catastrophes, there are people who identified what was going to happen, what was happening at the time, and then there were people who didn't. There are so many variables that are kind of brought to bear. All I can do as an artist is I don't consciously identify a theme or a concept as something that's pertinent to the age. It kind of just happens in a way. For example, what I'm doing now, it is possibly a consequence of spending more time with outside of society, or in my own studio on my own. I've started. I think I mentioned earlier, placing or reenacting the journeys of the classical world, these great odysseys, on my own environment. So, for example, I've made a map of Jason and the Argonauts' journey around the ancient world in search of the Golden Fleece, and I've superimposed it on a map of London. So the plan is, when we're unlocked and the weather's a bit better, to recreate the journey physically with a version of the Argo, and visit places in London that correspond with these places in the ancient world. It's a kind of it's a caprice, but at the same time, it's also as I said earlier, it's the parallels between the stories of the ancient world and our own stories are kind of brought to bear.
Well,
I'm rambling a bit here, but
well, it's fun. It sounds like it's going to be quite the journey, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results. I was going to flip things a little bit. So in all these times of change, one of the themes we pick up on is the whole idea of artificial intelligence. And I think right now we've seen the financial world, or let's say financial leaders, take a bit of a backseat to technology leaders. And I wonder if you believe in the idea that artificial intelligence will be replacing artists someday in the future. Maybe not?
I think, yes, I have been following the developments in artificial intelligence a little bit, not thoroughly. A lot of what I do, and what a lot of artists do, is completely contingent on the accidental. And in the works of Borges, the Argentinian writer, he comes up with palpable schemes whereby the everything is contained in one giant library. Obviously, it's within the realm of the possible for artificial intelligence to have some contingencies for every eventuality, but I believe there are probably time constraints in that respect. And what artists like the surrealists, with their idea of kind of the random encounters of two random objects, what they postulated is, I suppose, because it's called surrealism, it's surreal. You assume there's an element of the coincidental to it rather than an element of the constructed. So I am rambling a bit here. Whether artificial intelligence can accommodate such randomness and such absurdity, I'm not sure. In terms of the absurdity of the tone poem, or of alliteration, or of the spoonerism, I think those are elements of the kind of random encounter that fire up the artist's imagination. I think that, introduce an element of absurdity to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I was going to say art has a wonderful way of helping us make sense of the world, or churn it up and then digest it again. So I look forward
just
to
on that fact. It's lots of artists have told me they don't know why they're doing what they're doing, and come to the conclusion that the whole project is to create a problem that wasn't there in the first place, and then spend hours and hours solving it, to no particular end except to solve a problem of their own making.
There you go. And actually, one of the things I believe is when you look at how, for example, artificial intelligence replaces jobs, the question is, what are we going to do? And I think figuring out new problems to solve, or leveraging human creativity further is something that we could really look forward to. And I don't quite know how, but as you say, some of the wild ideas take a few years to prove their worth or their relevance in the world. Adam, I've found this fascinating, and I want to be careful not to get too overwhelmed with all the ideas we could talk about. But the idea with these interviews, beyond our normal work in investment brokerage, is to really inspire people to think beyond what we do day to day and where things are going in the future. So thank you for sharing so much of your inspiration.
Pleasure.
I don't know if you had any other final comments before we let you go.
Not really. I mean, do you have any other questions?
I don't right now, but we'll be sure to follow up in the future with you. I wanted to definitely mention some of the things I took away from this. I think, first of all, you've really helped me remember to reflect on society and how we all interact. I think also you shared a lot of insights in the creative process and different ways we can find our way to our end goal, even if we don't quite know what that is. And I think the part that I really enjoy is having a sense of humor and fun in the process, even in some pretty heavy topics. So thank you for bringing all that to the table.
Thank you very much, John. I suppose in conclusion, I could let you know that when I was working on some projects at Pictet, quite often the guys there would quote some kind of Latin verse, and I asked one of them, "What is it very important to you? Ancient Greece?" And I think they said, "Yes, it's the most important thing in our office." They saw this as that was their kind of the height of their daily life, was the fact that they had this as part of their existence.
There you go. Well, on that note, Adam, thank you again. I think we've touched on all kinds of interesting stuff. For those who want to find out more about your art, I would recommend Tag Fine Arts, who helped organize everything with us today. They've also been kind enough to give us a 10% discount for anybody who would like to pick up one of your prints or learn more about getting, I guess, a commission as well, or they can find out about contacting you for custom work. The discount code is FriendsDiscount, and it's tagfinearts.com, but we'll put that also in the description. So thank you again, Adam.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, John.
My pleasure. Have a great evening. All the best.
Enjoy the slopes.
Take care. We will.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.